Dorsey here, and today's video is going to be addressing some serious issues I have with Islam. I'm not going to be citing anything about the age of Aisha or anything like that, so don't expect this to be a David Wood type video. Especially considering that not many Muslims really care anyways to debate me about their own religion, I'll also consider this video to be for my fellow brothers and sisters in Christ so that they could use the points when addressing Muslims, since there's always a good chance to use new arguments instead of the tired out arguments. On to the video, shall we? Islam has been known for several things over the years, but recent discoveries as well as pondering upon the religion have led me to develop 5 reasons why I cannot accept Islam unless somebody's willing to answer these to my satisfaction, and I honestly doubt that this will be done. However, it never hurts to try, right? Number 1, Islam appears like a nationalist religion. This one here is one of the more recent reasons it seems problematic to me. It's funny how most of the tolerant people, if you can call them that, will shame the white nationalists or American nationalists, but will condone the Quran and those who adhere to a book that promotes a form of nationalism. You may be wondering what I'm talking about exactly. So here's the verse in Surah 3, Ayah 110. You are the best community ever raised for humanity. You encourage good, forbid evil, and believe in Allah. Had the people of the book believed, it would have been better for them. Some of them are faithful, but most are rebellious. This right here is a clear sign that there are a certain group of people who are, quote, the best community ever raised for humanity. Who does this imply? Maududi says the following in his commentary of the verse, where he says, quote, the Muslims have been appointed to that office because they possess those moral qualities which are essential for just leadership. These are to establish virtue and to eradicate evil practically, and believe that there is no God other than Allah, to put into practice and the implication of this belief. They should therefore understand the responsibilities of the work which had been entrusted to them and avoid the errors into which their predecessors had fallen. Concerning the traditional interpretations, the Study Quran tells us the following, quote, some understand this verse to mean that Muslims are destined to be the religious community as already written in the preserved tablet, Surah 85, Ayah 22. And that it is implied that Muslims should live up to this destiny. Best community may also refer to those who are the best people towards other people, which is the domain of enjoining right and forbidding wrong, and explains why action is placed before faith in this verse. The verse can be seen as describing the Muslim community's role in relation to other peoples in a way similar to the Quran's being described as a protector, muyamin, in relation to other scriptures, Surah 5, Ayah 48. Note that the letters in this quote indicate that the R shows Al-Razi held this view, and IK shows Ibn Kathir affirmed this. Essentially, 2 respected Islamic scholars are giving us this info that I gave you concerning the verse. Even more interesting is that Ibn Kathir in his tafsir says, Al-Bukhari recorded that Abu Hurairah commented on this ayah, you Muslims are the best nation of people for the people. You bring them tied in chains on their necks, capture them in war, and they later embrace Islam. The meaning of the ayah is that the Ummah of Muhammad is the most righteous and beneficial nation for mankind. Hence Allah's description of them, you enjoin al-Maruf and forbid al-Munkar, and believe in Allah. Ahmad, Al-Tirmidhi, Ibn Majah, and Al-Hakim record that Hakim bin Muharaya bin Hidayah narrated that his father said that the Messenger of Allah said, you are the final of 70 nations. You are the best and most honored among them to Allah. Now, I'm going to go ahead and just say this right now before we even continue. Do forgive me if I butcher some of the Arabic names here. Arabic is not my exact strong suit in language, especially in pronunciation. But this is a well-known hadith about which At-Tirmidhi said, Hassan, and which is also narrated from Mu'adh bin Jabal and Abu Sa'id. While it is not Sahih, it's pretty reliable and still doesn't have any reason to doubt it by Islamic standards. So there's my first reason, due to what seems like a theme that Muslims and the Islamic nations are more superior than non-believing nations. Christianity doesn't hold to this view since it says all are sinful and yet all are made in the image of God. Number 2, scientific errors in the Quran. Now before anybody points out the scientific errors in the Bible, I'm not making the claim that mine is free from scientific error. The difference is that my book is the word of God written by men from their perspective, so God would work with their pre-scientific worldview. However, the Quran is the direct words of Allah, preserved in the eternal tablet described of in Surah 85, ayah 21 to 22. So this is the words of Allah directly, and this is definitely considering the popular, quote, scientific miracle of the Quran argument. I already did a video on the verse about the sun setting in a spring of muddy water, so go check it out if you haven't already for that argument. But the one I will focus on is that of the embryology of the Quran as recorded of in Surah 23, ayah 12 through 14, which says the following, quote, "And indeed we created humankind from an extract of clay, then placed each human," keep in mind the brackets here are not in the original Arabic, "as a sperm drop in a secure place. Then we developed the drop into a clinging clot of blood, then developed the clot into a lump of flesh, then developed the lump into bones, then clothed the bones with flesh. Then we brought it into being as a new creation. So blessed is Allah, the best of creators." So while there are many issues to this that can be addressed, we will narrow down on something specifically within the latter part. Quote, "Then developed the clot into a lump of flesh, then developed the lump into bones, then clothed the bones with flesh. Then we brought it into being as a new creation." This right here is problematic considering that modern science tells us that the flesh and bones form at the same time for the new human being. However, the Quran says first comes the bones and then secondly comes the flesh to cover the bones. Some apologists try to defend this by saying that the word used thumma in the Arabic that means then actually means and instead, which allows for the reading to mean what is scientifically accurate. The problem is that number 1, the word being used is fakasana and not thumma. Secondly, the Arabic doesn't allow for this, as Lane's Arabic lexicon gives us the meaning of the fa in fakasana to mean, quote, "denoting conjunction in an absolute manner with delay." What's even more is that in the example that the Arabic scholar provides for the context that is being applied, he uses Surah 23, ayah 14 as the example where this application is being used. So in other words, this is a sequence implying the bones come first, and then in the sequence, it's the flesh that is formed next on top of it. So not only that, but Maududi even comments on the concept of embryology as discussed in Surah 22, ayah 5 through 6, where he says, quote, "This refers to the different stages of development of the child in the womb of its mother. This description is based on observation and not on scientific research, and there was no need for it for the purpose for which reference to this had been made here." Now, I can understand and use the argument as a Christian with the Bible since the books were written by men and not God. The Bible is God-inspired, though. However, the Quran is both God-written and inspired. If this is true, then Allah is writing this knowledge down. Did he think that embryology worked like this? I'd like the Muslim to answer this one. Besides that, and the video I mentioned earlier, there's 2 videos dealing with the flat earth of the Quran where the masked Arab mentions the earth was laid on the back of a whale. And then there's another one dealing with specifically this on embryology. So I'll link these for y'all to check out. Number 3, the Quran's Qira'at. Note that this is about the Qira'at, not the Aruf. The 7 Aruf are simply the dialects. As Yasser Qadi and other Quranic introduction books tell you, these 7 Aruf are referring to the dialect of the Quraysh, Hurail, Tamim, Hawazin, Taqif, Kina, and Yemen. I'm not talking about difference in recitation with our voice in dialects, however. I'm talking about the 7 Qira'at and that there's actually more than the mere 7 that exist. Most Muslims I've encountered will say there's only 7 and they may be getting it confused with Aruf, They are in error as a result when they think this, and as a scholar by the name of Ibn Majud had been pointing out, otherwise known as Majid ibn Jabir, he made a similar error as he claimed there were only 7 like the Aruf. But as Yasir Qadi points out, quote, due to this misconception, many of the later scholars took Ibn Majud to task, wishing that he had chosen a different number, so that this confusion could have been prevented. Further commenting on this is Ibn al-Jazri, who wrote, quote, many of the scholars disliked the fact that Ibn Majud restricted himself to 7 qira'at, and said that he was mistaken in doing so, and wished that he had chosen a number greater than this, or less than this, or at least explain the purpose behind choosing this number, so that those people who have no knowledge would not have been misled. In fact, once you start to study this subject, you see some scholars differ on this. Some believe it's only 5, some affirm 7, and others affirm 10 valid Quranic Qira'at. This honestly can't be explained well, as we will point out later, but I will simply point this out as Ahmed von Denfer, a German Islamic convert and scholar, he notes this. There are mainly 7, the first 5 being important with their popularity. In reality, for the Muslims, there are at least 10. However, when we examine the fact that there are different Arabic Qurans, this leads us to investigate the totality, which comes to somewhere between 26 and 31 different Arabic Qurans with textual variants between the modern copies. So while we have the Hafs, Warsh, Khalaf, Khalun, and Al-Duri Qurans, we also have the Qira'at of Al-Bazi, Kunbul, Khalad, Ibn Wadan, Ibn Jamaz, Ra, Ishaq, and others. While most of the textual variants you'll see here aren't really anything too significant and can easily be wrestled with, there are those that can affect reading and doctrine. Here's an example according to Shahzad Salim.
But again, it does change the meaning, and in some cases there is a drastic change in meaning as well. For example, in the Tayammum or in the Wuzu verse of Surah Ma'idah, which is the 6th verse of Surah Ma'idah, if it is read in a particular way, during ablution, we would not need to wash our feet. To wipe them would be sufficient. To do masa on them would be sufficient. So if we read the verse as Arjulakum ilal Ka'bayn, the way it is found in some of the versions, then we'll have to wash our feet. But if we read it as Arjulakum, then we would not need to wash our feet. Merely wiping them or doing masa on them would be sufficient if we are doing wuzu. So you can see that there is a difference in the directives as well.
So when it comes to Surah 5, Ayah 6 of the Quran, we wrestle with the difference in how to apply both of these. Naturally, the response is both are right, but the main problem is that in my question, if indeed the Quran has been preserved in eternal tablets in heaven, as Surah 85 teaches, but there are different Qira'at, which Qira'at is the one that resembles more closely to the original text or the original tablets in heaven? So far from what I even read in Yasir Qadi's book, there is no definitive way. Some of the conditions for a Sahih Qira'at have been conformity to Arabic grammar, conformity to Uthman's Mushafs, and an authentic chain of narrations. These conditions aren't unanimous, and chapter 11 of Qadi's book explains this in much bigger detail than one would think. For example, quote, they argue if a Qira'at is proven to have originated from the Prophet, then we cannot apply the rules of grammar to it. If we were to do this and presumed error in the Qira'at, then we would be implying that the Prophet made mistakes. Allah forbid. Therefore, an authentic Qira'at overrides a rule of Arabic grammar. Unquote. Another has the Qira'at difference between Ibn Abbas and the Hafs version of Surah 18, Ayah 79, where Hafs reads, and there was behind them a king who seized every ship by force, and then Ibn Abbas read, and there was in front of them a king who seized every usable ship by force. This is a clear contradiction in direction and how many ships were seized. But why dismiss Ibn Abbas' Qira'at, since he was granted wisdom of the Quran according to the Islamic tradition? Finally, the one on the narrators, as admitted by Imam al-Nurari, admits that this is a new invention and that it is contradicting the consensus of the jurists and the 4 madhabs and many scholars, so that they cannot even be counted. Yes, that's an actual quote from Imam al-Nari. So it seems not even the conditions can be agreed upon. So my question remains, which Qira'at is the closest to the original tablets and Quran. For more on this for the Arabic reading Muslims, consult Muhammad Fad Karun's Making Easy the Reading of What Has Been Sent Down. He goes over and lists the textual variants in his book on this, as you can even see from this page here that shows an example page with a list of the textual variants outside of the Quranic text. Number 4. Textual variants in Quranic manuscripts. Textual variants are pretty much any differences in a textual manuscript of any written document. For example, any differences in words, letters, punctuation, or markings that add to a particular language would be considered a textual variant, and much like the Bible, the Quran is not immune to this. The difference is that the Bible's textual transmission basis was an open and free transmission of the text with no Christian caliph in charge of standardizing any texts. They had a few master copies most likely, and some would use it to base it on their copying that started as early as the 2nd century, as Michael J. Kruger points in his book Christianity at the Crossroads. However, the Quran is an entirely different story. Its standard is that of a text that was ordered to be final and official by Uthman. This was done because, like many other texts, like many different texts, differences occurred, and these differences spread around. Qadi notes, quote, "Unfortunately, the Muslims started differing amongst themselves with regards to the recitation of the Quran. The Muslims from Syria were reciting the Quran differently than the Muslims from Iraq. They began contending with each other, each regarding his recitation superior to his brothers. These Muslims were not companions and therefore were not trained in the proper manner and etiquette of the recitation of the Quran." Sahih Bukhari records a story narrated by Anas bin Malik about Hudayfa bin al-Yaman pleading with Uthman, and it says, quote, "At the time when the people of Sham and the people of Iraq were waging war to conquer Armenia Band Arjaband, Hudayfa was afraid of their, referring to the people of Sham and Iraq, differences in the recitation of the Quran. So he said to Uthman, 'O chief of the believers, save this nation before they differ about the book as Jews and the Christians did before.' So Uthman sent a message to Hafsa saying, 'Send us the manuscripts of the Quran so that we may compile the Quranic materials in perfect copies and return the manuscripts to you.' Hafsa sent it to Uthman. Uthman then ordered Zayd bin Thabit, Abdullah bin Azubair, Said bin Al-As, and Abdurrahman bin Harith bin Hisham to rewrite the manuscripts in perfect copies. Uthman said to the 3 Qurayshi men, 'In case you disagree with Zayd bin Thabit on any point of the Quran, then write in the dialect of the Quraysh. The Quran was revealed in their tongue.' They did so, and when they had written many copies, Uthman returned the original manuscripts to Hafsa. Uthman sent to every Muslim province 1 copy of what they had copied and ordered that all the other Quranic materials, whether written in fragmentary manuscripts or whole copies, be burned." Now, the reason I highlighted all of this hadith is because some Muslims like to claim that Uthman ordering Quran manuscripts to be burnt is false, even though a Sahih hadith clearly says Uthman ordered them to be burned towards the end of the hadith. We seem to see another angle in this detail when Ibn Hasakir, in his History of Damascus, wrote the following, quote, "Uthman delivered a sermon and said, 'The people have diverged in their recitations, and I am determined that whoever holds any verses dictated by the Prophet himself must bring them to me.' So the people brought their verses, written on parchment and bones and leaves, and anyone contributing to this pile was first questioned by Uthman. 'Did you learn these verses, i.e., take this dictation directly from the Prophet himself?' So here we see they were trying to get all of what was considered the standard text, and this would include the 7 or even the 10 for that matter. To finish on this, Muhammad Mustafa al-Hazami notes the following in page 94 on his book, The History of the Quranic Text, where he says, quote, with the task complete, the ink on the final copy dry, and duplicate copies dispatched, there was no need for the numerous fragments of the Quran circulating in people's hands, so all such fragments were burned. Musab bin Sa'd asserts that the people were pleased with Uthman's decision. At the very least, no one voiced any objections. Even more shocking on this is the fact that Ibn Masud, one of the 4 Muhammad tells his followers to go to concerning the Quran, reveals something in a Sahih Hadith in At-Tirmidhi, which can be found in Volume 5, Book 44, Hadith number 3104, which says, Ubaidullah bin Abdullah bin Utbah informed me that Abdullah bin Masud disliked Zayd bin Thabit copying the Mus'haf, and he said, "O you Muslim people, avoid copying the Mus'haf and the recitation of this man. By Allah, when I accepted Islam, he was but in the loins of a disbelieving man," meaning Zayd bin Thabit. And it was regarding this that Abdullah bin Masud said, "O people of Al-Iraq, keep the Mus'haf that are with you and conceal them. For indeed Allah said, and whoever conceals something, he shall come with what he concealed on the day of judgment." Surah 3, Ayah 161. So meet Allah with the Mus'haf. Al-Azuri said, "It was conveyed to me that some men amongst the most virtuous of the companions of the Messenger of Allah disliked that view of Ibn Masud." So this also shows the division of the trusted companions of Muhammad that led to their split. Why am I mentioning all of this? Because if we were to do what Ibn Masud said, we would be able to have a good way to settle this debate on what the original and earliest Qurans actually said. But because we still have textual variants and a few surviving manuscripts, there remains issues that can't be settled. For example, Arthur Jeffrey lists several variants in Materials for the History of the Text of the Quran, where we have the following as provided by Keith Thompson, quote, Surah 2, Ayah 275 says, Alathihina yakuluna riba la yakumuna. You know what? I'm just gonna read the English translations of this. Those who devour usury will not stand. Ibn Masud's Quran, however, reads the same, but also added the following remark after, and that is, i.e., they would not be able to stand on the day of resurrection. Surah 6, Ayah 153 says, Verily, this is my path. Ibn Masud's Quran, however, reads, This is the path of your Lord. Surah 33, Ayah 6, says the following about Muhammad's wives and believers. And his wives are their mothers. Ibn Masud's Quran had the extra words, and he is their father. These are only 3 examples from a manuscript attributed to Ibn Masud versus most modern-day Qurans. The book by Jeffrey lists several other examples in case you decide to look this up. Another example comes from James White, where he says, Surah 3, Ayah 158 reads, If you should die or be slain, before him you shall undoubtedly be gathered. But the Great Paris manuscript of the Quran, one of the earliest we possess, contains an extra Arabic letter that changes the entire meaning to you shall not be gathered. This was even mentioned during a debate, and watch how this was addressed.
Now please, make sure you understand why I point this out. I'm not saying we can't figure out the original wording, but I am pointing out how important it is to have a full, unedited, widely dispersed manuscript tradition with which to make such determinations. That is very, very important.
Extra alif, can you believe that? Extra alif. This is just crazy textual criticism. I'm not even going to address that. Extra alif and waw and fa, anyone knows spelling differences, scribal styles may differ, may vary. It's about the contents. This is why we have the oral transmission to tell us how to recite this book.
Then, if I say, if you pray, God will reward you, is that different than if I say, if you pray, God will not reward you? Is there sort of a difference between those two statements? I show you a variant in the Quran with an extra aleph, and they'll go, ha 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 ha. But the difference is between you will be gathered or will not be gathered. That's a 180-degree difference. Laughter is not a refutation, my friends. Laughter is a refutation for the unthinking, not for the thoughtful. Think about that.
Now, Keith Small mentions the following problem as a result of the various variants and the lack of tons of early Quranic Mus'hafs available for us today. One major discussion in Quranic studies has centered on the search for an urtext of the Quran. Islamic tradition has usually identified the Quran as we know it with this urtext, and this view has achieved a status of religious orthodoxy. In contemporary popular Islamic discourse, it is an assertion often stated as established fact that the text of the Quran has been preserved perfectly since it was given to Muhammad. To the contrary, early and medieval Islamic scholarship was quite free in its recognition of textual variation and missing portions of the Quran, and did not tend to make claims of perfect transmission. So there was a recognition as well as that even without too much mushafs and textual variations, one could still be a Muslim without accepting perfect preservation. However, I don't even think this is convincing in light of New Testament textual criticism. But to focus on the last set of variants, here's a few clips from an episode of my Theological Discussion podcast episode going over Dr. Benham Siddiqui and Dr. Mohsen Gerdazi's paper on the Sa'ana palimpsest. This right here, it says, nonetheless, it also goes without saying that any evidence that can potentially shed further light on early Islam will be of great interest to historians and may sway at least some of us. The Quran under study is one of such pieces of evidence. So he said that the Quran under study, meaning this manuscript, Sa'ana 1, is a palimpsest. That is a manuscript of which text, the text lower writing, was erased by scraping or washing and then written over. Now I say this and try to repeat this because there are many Muslims who are going to be watching this probably and will say that, oh well, you know, I don't believe that. Let's go to what the Muslims say. We've had Shabir Ali explain this. We have had these two Muslim scholars explain this about what it is. The purple letters here, that's the upper text. The others are the lower text. And what it says here about the lower text is this: the lower Quran is of enormous interest because it is so far the only manuscript that is known to be non-Uthmanic. That is, from a textual tradition other than the standard one. One of us previously did a detailed study of this codex based on 4 folios, and he explains that in a citation that there is a book or a study that is called The Codex. And I think it's by one of them or by both of them, if I'm not mistaken. Again, you can check out the link in the description to go check out this paper and look at it up yourself, and you'll see what it's called and who wrote it, and then you can of course do extended research if you want. So, and as Rob Christian points out, Sa'ana manuscript has many contradictions and variations in the text compared to today's Quran versions, and that is true. We will get into those in a bit. So let's continue onward though with this. So right here, we now extend the analysis to all the folios except one, of which the image we do not have. In this essay, we focus on the broad features of the text, postponing to future publications a systematic textual analysis of all the variants. So I don't know if that means at some point they plan on doing a future publication where they go over all the textual variants in a textual analysis of this text. That would be something that would be interesting to find if they do plan a date, or if they've already done it, because if I'm not mistaken, this was done in 2012, this paper. But it says, we shall argue below that regardless of the date of the lower codex, meaning of the lower text, the one that's faded, that they washed over and erased, the textual tradition to which it belonged and the Uthmanic tradition must have diverged sometime before the spread of the Uthmanic tradition in the mid-7th century AD. Therefore, comparing these two traditions opens a window onto the earliest phase of the Quran's history. So in other words, before the Uthmanic revision, before the Uthmanic tradition, this early text, this lower text, allows us insight into how the Quran was viewed in its early history. Goes on to say, we shall also argue, based on just such a comparison, that contrary to a common view, the existing pieces of revelation were joined to form the surahs prior to Uthman's famous and fairly effective attempt to standardize the text. So it says Sa'ana 1 in the Origins of the Quran, that's the name of the book or the paper. Page 21 will show you table 1, examples of major variants. Now they mentioned there are minor variants, that is that there are things that don't really affect the meaning of the text, or that they're just like vowels and differentiations in spelling. So those would be considered the minor variants. Major variants are a different thing altogether. So for example, this one here, the variant description is in Quran Surah 2 Ayah 196. It says that C1, which by the way, I don't know if I was able to grab that. When it refers to C1 in the text, and you can read the study and it'll tell you, when they say C1, that's referring to a pre-Uthmanic text. The standardization text, or the standard text, as you can see right there, is what you'll find in the upper text, and what would match your Quran today. So that upper text would be in your Arabic Qurans for the most part today. But the one below it, the washed one, the erased one, would not match it. And here's how we can prove it. So it says in Surah 2, Ayah 196, that C1, the lower text, does not have the word, again, this is where I'm going to be butchering it, Ru'usakum. Or Usakum, however you pronounce it, because I see there's that one line above the U, above the U. So the standard text basically says in English, do not shave your heads until the offering reaches its destination. This word here means your heads. You want to know why? Because then in the translation from these two Muslim scholars that know Arabic and are translating it for us, point out that it says it means do not shave until the offering reaches its destination. So notice here that not only are we missing a word, but the very fact that we are missing a word here changes the meaning in terms of the Islamic view of how to approach this. So when it says do not shave your heads until the offering reaches its destination, meaning it's limited to a certain part of your body, meaning the head, all the hair on the area. Do not shave your heads until the offering reaches its destination. But in the text of the lower text, it's missing this one. So basically, when they washed it and started from scratch, they added the word there. But the lower text, without having it, says do not shave, period, meaning your head, your beard, your armpit hair, whatever other places that you would shave, that it's saying do not shave until the offering reaches its destination. Now, we're focused on what's in the highlighted here, but listen to this, and they even have the Arabic version with the note as well. Now, listen to this and what they say here. Another exception concerns verse 85 of Surah 9. So, keep this in mind. Surah 9, Ayah 85. Which is missing. At 16 words, this omission is found to be an outlier when compared to the sizes of other missing elements in C1, which is the lower text, which are much shorter. And you guys, you saw it whenever we took a look at some of these, because these are definitely small in like certain phrases, like it just had missing of a word or a couple of words. This, on the other hand, hold up, there we go, has an entire verse missing. Surah 9, Ayah 85 in the lower text of the Quran is simply missing. Now, but here's what the other thing. Keep in mind that this is how they understand it. And this could be something that can be explained, but at the same time, it still makes you wonder. It says, quote, the anomaly may be explained, so they don't know, by the common phenomenon of parablepsis, a form of scribal error in which the eye skips from one text to a similar text. In this case, from the instance of una followed by a verse separator and the morpheme ura at the end of verse 84, to the instance of una followed by a verse separator and the morpheme wa at the end of verse 85. So it explains that there is a possible explanation as to why this is not there, but you still have to consider the fact that there is, and based off of the fact, off the manuscript evidence, there is a missing verse of Surah 9 in an early Quranic manuscript. Finally, its depiction of Jesus is fictional and not historical. The Quranic Jesus most certainly didn't exist and is closer to Gnostic gospel versions of Jesus, where the theology is centered around the creator being a wicked and evil demiurge god. But not to mention that it is even denying one of the most historical points about Jesus. Surah 4, Ayah 157 says, "And for boasting we killed the Messiah, Jesus, son of Mary, the messenger of Allah, but they neither killed nor crucified him. It was only made to appear so." Even those who argue for this crucifixion are in doubt. They have no knowledge whatsoever, only making assumptions. they certainly did not kill him. Besides the New Testament Gospels affirming Jesus died upon crucifixion, as well as the early creed in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 3 through 4, we also have secular scholars like Bart Ehrman, who stated in pages 261 to 262 of The New Testament, A Historical Introduction to the Early Christian Writings, the following, quote, "One of the most certain facts of history is that Jesus was crucified on orders of the Roman prefect of Judea, Pontius Pilate." Josephus likewise states that, quote, "Pilate condemned him to be crucified and to die," and Tacitus also records this crucifixion in his Annals, where even Bart Ehrman comments on this in page 197 by saying, quote, "In any event, Tacitus's report confirms what we know from other sources, that Jesus was executed by order of the Roman governor of Judea, Pontius Pilate." So the only thing left to deal with here is what some Muslims, and especially Ahmadiyya ones, will say. They claim Jesus swooned on the cross, but that he didn't die. However, Roman executions were done with precision to ensure none survived, and in fact, a scientist and a scholar both examined this incident in a paper entitled On the Physical Death of Christ, published by the Journal of American Medical Association. In it we read the following, quote, "The Gospel of John describes the piercing of Jesus' side and emphasizes the sudden flow of blood and water. Some authors have interpreted the water to be ascetes, or urine, from an abdominal midline perforation of the bladder. However, the Greek word, or plera, used by John clearly denoted laterality and often implied the ribs. Therefore, it seems probable that the wound was in the thorax and well away from the abdominal midline. Although the side of the wound was not designed by John, it traditionally has been depicted on the right side. Supporting this tradition is the fact that a large flow of blood would be more likely with a perforation of the distended and thin-walled right atrium or ventricle than the thick-walled and contracted left ventricle. Although the side of the wound may never be established with certainty, the right seems more probable than the left. Some of the skepticism in accepting John's description has arisen from the difficulty in explaining with medical accuracy the flow of both blood and water. But part of this difficulty has been based on the assumption that the blood appeared first, then the water. However, in the ancient Greek, the order of the words generally denoted prominence and not necessarily a time sequence. Therefore, it seems likely that John was emphasizing the prominence of blood rather than its appearance preceding the other. Therefore, the water probably represented serous pleural and pericardial fluid, and would have preceded the flow of blood and been smaller in volume than the blood, perhaps in the setting of hypovolemia and impending acute heart failure. Pleural and pericardial effusions may have developed and would have added to the volume of apparent water. The blood, in contrast, may have originated from the right atrium or the right ventricle, or perhaps from a hemopericardium. Just like that, my Arabic won't even match well with the whole thing here on medical terms. So right here we see that because of the water here in the passage, it coming out along with Jesus' blood indicated death. This is why the swoon theory has easily been shut down and refuted among scholarship. So these are the 5 main reasons I cannot convert to Islam. If any Muslim cares to explain these or reply to this to answer it to the best of my satisfaction, if they can, then I would consider converting. While there are several other issues, these are the 5 big ones that pose theological problems for me. So invite anybody from Muhammad Hijab to Akil on Q to address this video. I honestly don't care who addresses it. If the arguments are sound, then that alone would convince me, not the person who is. This has been RC Apologist. Take care.